We are really excited, like I said, to welcome back Sister District. They do a lot of amazing work. They focus on getting Democrats, people who want common sense in our state houses elected into office. They're doing tons of work in swing states right now to really make a difference. I use their data on down ballot races all of the time. Come to a rally or squad training. You'll hear me talk about them there. So I am going to introduce Gabby Goldstein, and she's going to introduce the rest of the speakers and get us going for the evening.
Thank you, Julie and Julie. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being with us. I'm so excited to have this conversation to get us fired up about voting down ballot in 34 days. We were just talking about that. I cannot believe the number is that small, but it is. So I'm Gabby Goldstein. I'm one of our co-founders at Sister District, and it is so much fun to be back with our friends at Red Wine and Blue. This is our third sweep salon that we've done this year, and it's going to be a great conversation. So thank you for being with us October 1st. For those who celebrate Halloween month, thank you for being here. It's VP debate night. Thank you for, as Julie said, warming up here in this conversation. Of course, there's a ton of attention at the top of the ballot, but the truth is that our state legislatures are so important, just as important as federal races and increasingly powerful, but they're still often pretty off the radar, including for many of our voters. So we're here to talk about that tonight and get everybody fired up to get their friends, their families, everybody they know to vote down ballot. So quick overview of what we're going to cover. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sister District for folks who might be new, introduce our fantastic speakers, and then moderate a conversation to learn about just how close these state legislative races are, how huge the impact of these races is, and that these tiny wins and losses separate us from huge power in our states and frankly across the country. And then we'll learn a little bit about ballot roll-off and how it affects Democrats more than Republicans. We'll hear about incredible gains that our state legislatures have had and will continue to have when we close these tiny little margins through all the work that everybody on this call is doing, right? Raising those small dollars, talking to voters, all the rest. We should have a few minutes for Q&A, so please do put any questions in the chat. We'll have some calls to action, and then we'll wrap up. So just a bit about Sister District. Our mission, as Julie mentioned, is to build progressive power in state legislatures. And we do that by electing great state legislators and helping them succeed once they're in office. My co-founders and I started this organization in late 2016 because we saw a gap in organizing capacity and resources going specifically to Democrats running for state legislature and serving at that level of the government. I always say Democrats are tardy to the party when it comes to paying attention to state legislatures. The Republicans have been masterful at using state legislatures as laboratories for the regressive policies that they want to pass all over the country. And it's time for us, and we've been working on this for years now, right? To build power in these seats. Our legislatures are our policy pipelines. They are our leadership pipelines. They are growing in power, right? Everything from fair districts to abortion rights, these are decided by states. So 8 years later, our work is more important than ever, right? We have this revanchist Supreme Court that's turning our civil rights and liberties back to states. We have continued Republican rules rigging, from gerrymandering and voter suppression and all the rest, even looking to this election, ways that Republican legislatures are looking to manipulate the results this year. And so we know what we're up against, but we can't just be against things, right? We have to be for things. And our blue states really show us what's possible. We've got an incredible lawmaker from Virginia who can tell us about when we had our beautiful blue trifecta in Virginia, first state in the South to abolish the death penalty, so much more. We have an incredible lawmaker from Michigan, our new trifecta, where they repealed right to work and all the rest right away and got to work. And so that really shows us, these states really show us what we can achieve when progressives control our states. So with so much attention at the top of the ballot, we have to also focus down ballot. I like to say attention is not a pie. We can do both. We can focus at the top of the ballot and also at the bottom of the ballot. So with that, let's talk about our panelists. So I'm so excited to have Isa Alamran on the line. Isa is a lead analyst at Data for Progress, and he supports the polling team across various projects, working on surveys and polling analysis, and he's really passionate about using data to support progressive policy. We have Representative Jamie Churches from the Michigan House of Representatives with us. She was first elected in 2022 by a dramatic victory of 660 votes, one of the closest races in the state that year, and so absolutely critical to clinching that Democratic majority. And we'll hear about Jamie and her race and what she's been up to in the legislature. And then we have Delegate Alex Askew, who was first elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 2019 by a margin of just over 800 votes. If you see a pattern here, this is the pattern. Tiny, tiny, tiny margins separate wins from losses. And so we'll hear from Delegate Askew about what he's been able to accomplish in the legislature and all the rest. So skipping over longer intros, I hope that folks will take a minute to introduce themselves as we get into the panel conversation. So let us dive in. So Representative Churches and Delegate Askew, I'd love to start with you both. You've each been in incredibly tight races, right, that were really consequential to your states in the past few cycles. I'd love if you could share your experience of winning a race by less than 1,000 votes, how tight these races are, and what it's meant for folks in your communities.
So I was a fifth grade teacher. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was just like, I'm gonna run for this seat. And I was led by a woman who ran for state house, and she's like, you have to knock a lot of doors. And how many do you think you can do? And I got out and I did as many as I could every day, and I canvassed, and almost 14,000 doors I canvassed by myself. So I think I won by a field margin, and this time I'm doing the same because this is a very conservative leaning district. And this time I've used my skills as a elementary school teacher, and some of the girls that I've taught since they were in preschool are now 16, and they are canvassing with me after student council or dance. And I have some college students from a local university. And I think it all starts with community and knowing these people's families. Like one of my fellows, their dad was my doctor, took care of me when I had strep throat. And I had always been active as a community member, as an educator. So I think I'm coming at this more as being a person that served in the community and then organizing around people and having those conversations. And I'm talking to Trump voters who are going to vote for Trump and going to vote for me, which is confusing, but also like we're here for it because we have to let people into this tent so it can grow larger and we can expand consciousness and see that we are more alike than we are different. So I think just by knocking doors, and now I think we've made over 100,000 contacts, and it rained today and we did phone banking inside instead. And just having snacks with students and talking about politics and talking about these kids' future, I think the community I've built on my team is speaking to what I'm doing both in my district, but also what we're trying to do in the legislature for the people of Michigan as a greater body. So,
hello, everyone. My name is Alex Askew, delegate from Virginia Beach with a little bit of Norfolk, from the eastern and coastal region of Virginia. Like Gabby said, I was first elected in 2019 with a lot of help from sister districts. I always I show a lot of gratitude and so thankful for sister district for that race. But I think what Gabby did leave out was my gap in service, my failed reelection in 2021, where I lost by 115 votes in a recount. So don't let anybody ever, and I said this all the time, don't let anybody ever tell you that every vote doesn't count and that these down ballot races don't matter. Fortunately, I was able to come back after redistricting, where I went from a very tight seat to one where I didn't have an opponent during my last election, which is great. But, these, as Gabby stated, as Representative Church stated, these elections are won on the ground. I think with a lot of one-on-one conversations. I started my political journey in 2012. I can't believe it was so long ago, but in 2012 for Barack Obama's reelection campaign, I was a field organizer where I knocked on thousands of doors. I probably registered hundreds of people and really took a lot of that work into my race, right? A lot of that organizing work, a lot of those one-on-one conversations, really asking people, what they thought about. It's great. We see all the time the top issues that are on MSNBC or Fox News or whatever else, but sometimes it's as small as this school in your district not being funded at the same rate as a school that's less than 3 or 4 miles away because of how our schools are funded. So I think a lot of times it's about the one-on-one conversations, really getting to know what people are thinking about and talking about. But since my first term in the General Assembly, a lot has changed. We had the majority in the House, in the Senate. We had the governor's mansion where we were able to pass groundbreaking legislation. A lot, if you know about this time, of course, it was the Black Lives Matter movement. We passed a lot of criminal justice reform legislation, fishback bills that where folks didn't know that they had the opportunity to have parole. The jury wasn't informed that they had parole, the option, or that parole was taken away. So folks were able to, and as much as recently as a few years back, able to get out early because of crimes that they were put in prison for, but able to get out because they were able to go through the process of parole. We extended the early voting period to 45, so 45 days. So we have one of the longest periods of early voting across the nation where I haven't voted yet because I was out there the first day and the line was a little long. So we do have a few more days. So we'll be sure to early vote and use that. But and now when I lost my race, that's when Governor Youngkin came in. I'm sure you all have seen a Trump in a red vest, as we like to call him here in Virginia, right? Who's just a khaki wearing MAGA extremist, for lack of better terms. But we're fortunate to take back the House. This past term when I got reelected, and we're still fighting for the same things. And as that term where we didn't have the majority in the House, we did have the majority in the Senate. We were able to protect a lot of the progress we made when we did have the trifecta, as we like to call it. But every vote matters. These down ballot races, we are on a weird schedule in Virginia, so we don't have our House races till next year. So that's even, and I think we're actually maybe on the top of the ballot next year. But every other year it's a gubernatorial race or a senatorial race as well. But
Delegate Askew, thank you. You're right. The losses are just as important as the wins for this point, which is how close these races are and what's at stake. And so your first win, 800 votes, your loss with 115 votes. That year in 2021, Democrats lost the entire House of Delegates by 750 votes. Right? About as much as you won your first race by. The entire chamber, we lost the whole chamber. And this is a great segue because that year in 2021, there were 65,000 more people who voted for the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Terry McAuliffe, than Democrats running for state leg in Virginia. And we lost by 750 votes. And so if just 750 of the 65,000 people who voted for Terry had voted for state leg candidates, you wouldn't have lost that race and we wouldn't have lost that trifecta. And so it's such a great example of how tight these races are, not just at the district level, but for the entire chamber. They rise and fall by these tiny margins, and it makes such a huge difference. And it's a great segue. Isa, I'd love to talk to you a little bit on the data side. It was really great to work together earlier this year to take a deeper look at ballot roll-off, which is something that at Sister District we've been looking at for a while. And so, Isa, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about what ballot roll-off is and why it's such a significant issue for Democrats at the state legislative level.
Thanks, Gabby. Hello, everyone. My name is Isa Alomran. As Gabby said, I'm a lead analyst at DFP, Data for Progress. I joined October of 2020, and here we are this is actually my 4-year anniversary. So really very thematic to be here. So Down ballot roll-off, for those who are unaware, describes a phenomenon where a voter will tick the races or like the offices at the top of their ballot, but as they go down the ballot, they'll stop voting altogether, right? So you might have someone who will vote for president, U.S. Senate, U.S. Congress, but as they get towards statewide offices, local elections, school board races, they'll just skip those altogether. A statistic from Sister District research, actually, which I really like to cite as well, is that over the last 8 years in 10 battleground states, Democrats at the down ballot Democrats, so Democrats running for office down the ballot, experience roll-off 80% of the time compared to only 40% of their Republican counterpart, right? So like, think of it this way. You have 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats voting in an election. All 10 will vote for president. Only 2 Democrats will vote for state legislature compared to 6 Republicans. And that's not great, right? Because of the reasons that Gabby, Alex, and Jamie mentioned, right? Tight margins that have significant impacts on what legislation gets passed, what legislation gets blocked, and how that impacts all of us. And so this general trend of down ballot roll-off matters a lot to Democrats in particular, because a lot of the research that we kind of conducted with Sister District and with Gabby showed us that groups of voters who are more likely to or most likely to give Democrats those victories for U.S. Senate and U.S. president are the ones that tend to roll off more than anyone else. And so these are voters who are in our camp, right? Voters who we don't have to convince to turn out and vote, voters who we don't have to even convince of our ideas for the most part, right? People who are solidly with us. They just, for various reasons we'll discuss today, don't vote down ballot. And so our research kind of looked into the reasons for that and maybe different ways that we can kind of combat roll-off to ensure that we maintain our steady victories at the state legislative level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isa. And it's wild. When we started to look at this, it was actually to go back to Virginia and 2017 for folks who can put on take a ride back in the time machine. I know Delegate Askew will remember this. It was our first year at Sister District running a program, endorsing candidates and helping them win. And it came down the entire chamber, the chamber where Delegate Askew serves, control of that chamber came down to a tie in one district, Shelley Simon's district, down near where Alex serves, right? She's in Hampton Roads.
Yes, Newport News. Mm-hmm.
Newport News, that's right. And so, and in Virginia, the way that they settle a tie is you put both names in a ceramic bowl, and the name that was pulled out of the ceramic bowl was not Shelley's name. And so control of that entire chamber stayed with the Republicans that year because of one vote, right? It was one vote difference. And so we started to see that, and of course that year, we started to see from the beginning that there were these big gaps between the top of the ticket and the bottom of the ticket. And so that's what really got our mind going here from a research perspective. If we could just convince some of those folks, as Isa said, they've done the hardest thing. They've gotten out to vote. That's the hardest part, is getting somebody into the voting booth. And they've done that. They've gotten over that biggest hurdle. If we could just convince some of them to vote for Democrats down ballot, we could win, really across the board in so many places. And so, one vote is a majority, right? And Jamie, you've been in a chamber with one seat majority, right? And these tiny little majorities, that's all it takes. But being in a seat that was won by such a small margin might present some challenges and opportunities. I'd be so curious, Representative Churches and Delegate Askew, what are the implications of being in such a marginal seat? Has it held you back did you have a big sort of GOP target on you for the next race? Or how has that impacted you? And what has been the impact of having a one seat majority or a very tiny majority in terms of what Michigan and Virginia were able to accomplish during the 2 years of that trifecta? We're getting it back next year.
Sure. And I think, I'll address the first first sort of question, because I know the difference in some of the policy that I'm looking to put forward when I was in seat 51, and now that I'm in seat, 67, right, where I go from a race that's going to come down to every single vote you take potentially. It's going to be on a mailer or commercial or a radio ad, until now. So that definitely I think can sort of determine the way you vote, right? But it's also determining because we have a great Speaker of the House, first Black Speaker of the House of Virginia, who makes sure that we're protected. We're not gonna really. He makes sure that you're not in a position in as a caucus as a whole where you're going to take bad votes, where they're going to be on a mailer, because we do have the opportunity to expand our majority next year. So I think that's really important. And I know that having great leadership and just really firsthand knowing the difference between being in a super safe seat and a super tight seat. But I think as we look at more broadly and how we can sort of retain and work with policy with having a one seat majority, I think it's sort of similar, right? I think as far as being strategic about the legislation you put up, unfortunately we have a Republican governor, so a lot of the things that we do want to put forward are more than likely going to get vetoed, and we saw that last year, right? And I think as we're going to be strategic about that as we move into an election year and go into sort of the lame duck portion of Governor Youngkin's term. But I think to that, you also need to look at how we want to message things going into the election year, right? And make the Republicans go on the board. We do have a process where we can change our, with the two votes with the same legislation, we can change our Constitution, right? So we are looking to codify and put in our Constitution, a right to reproduction, right for reproduction, right. So we are working on some of that draft language. So we vote on it this year. There has to be an election in between. Then we could vote on it again, and it becomes a part of our Constitution. So that is one thing that we're going to work on and make sure the Republicans, go up on the board and show us truly where they stand, on certain issues that are important to us. They should be important to every American, but at least definitely, important to Democrats. So this is one example of, how we sort of operate with a one seat majority that hopefully we can expand next year.
Once we got majority, we were able to come and just get things done. So my first bill was required background checks for firearms. We had a slew of gun safety. We had a pension tax. We repealed the right to work. We really stood up with workers. We got free breakfast and lunch for students, which I was really happy about for the last 2 years in the budget. And we've made monumental investments in mental health, among so many other priorities. And having a Democratic trifecta for the first time in nearly 40 years, it really made a difference in our state. And what I tell people is I'm here because I need more time. My team needs more time. And a lot of the things that we did, they seem really amazing. And I think that they are, but so much of it is undoing what has been done that has been detrimental to the progress of our society, in my opinion. So we have laid a really strong foundation, and now we're working toward building upon that. And I think personally, it's something that you're not ready for. Last summer, the governor came to my district and we're outside at a house, like doing a fundraiser, because for the seat, you have to raise a lot of money. I have no idea how, but we've raised over $500,000, mostly because of like sister district and organizations like all of you. But during my speech, like it was like a moment I'll never forget. The governor was standing next to me and a plane flew by and it said, recall Jamie Churches. And I was like, wow, like that's really a lot of effort and coordination. And since then, there's trackers that follow you into the Capitol, or I've had people follow me to my car in the parking garage. I've tripped over people filming in like a bush, like random things, walking my dog. I mean, I've had a community member call me a communist. They send mailers like saying things to that nature. So you're kind of swimming through mud slinging like that's going on, but you're trying to stay focused on what really matters. And then when you're having these conversations, there's a lot of anger with some folks, and then there's a lot of just appreciation from others. And there's a big spectrum when you're in a district like mine. But I think remembering your why and knowing that there's a reason why we're here, and there's a reason why there's so much misinformation and opposition, because they want me to be intimidated. They want me to slow down. They want me to feel defeated. And it's why conversations like this are so important in the communities that we can build, not only in our district, but outside of our district, because it helps mobilize me and my team. And it helps me remember this is important. I'm strong enough to do this. I'm capable enough to do this. And this is meaningful to me in my life and my community.
Everyone on this call has got your back, Jamie. It is tough. And I mean, you know, both of you and Alex, your states went from deeply red legislatures to blue in during the past few years, right? And Alex, we're getting that trifecta back next year, but those 2 beautiful years. But really, it was really interesting, just as I'll just share, to see how quickly both of your legislatures were able to spring into action right when you got those majorities and had that governing majority for your Democratic governors. And it's been inspiring to see in Michigan, and it was so inspiring to see in Virginia. Really, both sometimes we call it the inside and outside the dome strategies, right? The inside the dome with your leadership and caucus was just ready to go with the agenda, and then the outside the dome with the advocacy organizations and community organizers, it was all so synced up and ready to go. And it's, you know, it's just really, really wonderful to see. And of course, we're talking about tiny, fragile majorities that you had in those chambers. And sometimes I get the question, oh, I know we lost 1,000 state legislative seats during Obama's administration. Democrats lost 1,000 state leg seats. How are we doing now? I get that question sometimes. So earlier this year, I ran the numbers, and it turns out that the net gain for Democrats is not huge. We've gained about 150 seats out of that 1,000 that we lost. But that doesn't tell the whole story. It depends on where those seats are, right? One seat flips a chamber. So in 2016, Republicans controlled 67 state legislative chambers. Today, it's 56. So even though we've only flipped 150 net seats, that's 11 more chambers, entire chambers, right? Today, more people live in Democratic-controlled states than Republican-controlled states, right? And so it's about being strategic and having those tiny, tiny margins in the right districts. So just wanted to share that, because I think it's a good reminder that that's why we're here tonight, right? Every vote counts at this level. So Isa, I'd love to talk a little bit more about ballot roll-off. You mentioned we had done this research earlier that had sort of quantified how frequent this phenomenon is, where someone votes at the top of the ticket, but they roll off their ballot. They don't vote for state leg. But we didn't know who rolls off their ballot or why they roll off their ballot. And I've seen some questions in the chat about why do people roll off their ballot. So I'd love to get a better sense, dig in a little bit, both on the who. Maybe we can start there. Who is it that, you know, once our organizations dug in and did this national survey that maybe you can mention, what did we learn about who it is that rolls off their ballots? And then we'll talk about the why, but let's start with the who.
Now, these are all great questions. So we conducted different types of research. We did focus groups where we talked directly with voters to better understand, you know, how they view state legislative races, what they know, what they're comfortable with, and what they're uncomfortable with, honestly. And we did that with liberal voters and conservative voters. And then we did a larger survey of many thousands of people to better quantify that based on the learnings of that focus group. And what we found was really stark. There are key demographic groups that roll off at much higher rates than their counterparts. And it really helps kind of illustrate why we see the pattern of Democratic down ballot roll off that we do. And so these groups are women. Women tend to roll off more than men. 12% of women roll off compared to 7% of men. Black and Latino voters, voters of color in general, but thinking specifically of Black and Latino voters, they're much more likely to roll off than their white counterparts. So 14% of Black voters and 12% of Latino voters will roll off compared to 8% of white voters. And then younger voters. So thinking about the average age of voting in the US, it's 45. Voters under 45 are much more likely to roll off. 17% of them will roll off compared to only 6% of voters who are older than that. And then we also see a very similar trend by college education. Voters with a college degree will tend to vote down ballot at higher rates than voters without a college degree. And so what we see here is that these are groups of voters who have made up the Democratic tent across the country and have contributed to really high-profile victories, right? 2022 is the most recent example when we think about the US Senate, where Democrats were able to hold on to their Senate majority by really tight margins in some cases. But that victory becomes less and less rosy and really there as we move down ballot, right? And it is because these voters who contribute to those victories at the top of the ballot, don't feel like they have or have multiple reasons why they don't vote down ballot. And so that's why we see Republican lawmakers end up winning a larger share of the vote, oftentimes when there are more Democrats that turned out to vote for president in any given geographic area.
Yeah, so just to put a finer point on it, the folks who are most likely to this year we're going to do everything we can to turn this pattern around. But let's say in 2020, the folks who are most likely to vote for Joe Biden, that's the hardest part, is getting into the ballot box. Vote for Joe Biden and then not vote, not tick the box for their Democrat running for state house. Women, voters of color, young voters. Just as you said, these are the folks who are so key to building our reflective democracy, having their voices heard. And so it's really helpful to know who these folks are. So now we have the what, which is, how frequent is this? And, does it affect Dems more? TLDR, yes. So we've got the what. We've got the who, which is women, young voters, voters of color, most likely to roll off their ballots. Now is this $1 million question. Why? Why do they roll off their ballots? What did we learn in the course of both the qualitative focus groups as well as the quantitative survey about why our voters, in particular liberal voters, roll off their ballots?
More great questions. So there are a variety of reasons that I think we would benefit from bucketing into two big picture buckets. The first is a lack of agency, or feeling like there's a lack of agency. Many liberal voters feel like their votes don't actually make a difference in state legislative races, right? So when you ask them, do you feel like your vote matters? They will tell you no. I don't think that my vote matters. These voters are also more likely to think that state governments don't actually make that much of a difference, which we all know is not true, but they believe that. And they're less likely to think that state governments determine key issues that are key to them, right? So like when you ask them which branch of government has more influence on an issue like abortion or gun control, most of these voters will tell you that it's the federal branch rather than the state branch, when the past 2 years, if anything, have showed us that the states really get to determine how a lot of these issues impact us in our daily lives, right? Thinking about abortion rights is the most salient example here. So there is a sort of lack of agency. Like, I don't matter in the bigger picture. My vote doesn't really change anything. And my vote for state legislative races don't really change anything because I don't think state legislative races matter. And we all know that that's not true. The second category of reasons why is very related. It's a lack of confidence. Liberal voters, right? So these groups of voters, voters of color, women, and younger voters, often feel unprepared to decide between candidates in legislative races. They tell us that they don't know enough about the candidates. And when maybe they do know about the candidates, they don't know enough about the actual races themselves or what the offices do. In fact, just comparing liberal and conservative voters, we see that about 15% more conservatives correctly guess or state rather what state legislators do compared to their Democratic counterparts, right? So they feel like they don't have enough information, and when they do have information on some of these candidates, they don't actually know what the roles do, right? Like I know this candidate is part of my community, but I actually don't know what I would be electing them for or what I would be electing them to do. And importantly, they're worried about voting for the wrong candidate, right? So these are all different reasons, but when you're in the voting booth and you have all the different offices that you could tick off, right? Why don't you vote for the Democrat if you are a Democrat? Well, a lot of these voters are worried that they would vote for the wrong candidate, somebody whose values don't align with their own, right? A lot of these voters will vote for somebody and then find out, oh, this wasn't actually a good vote, or this candidate isn't really aligned with me. And so they feel worry about voting for the wrong person and how that might impact their community. So it's these forces together working, these different forces working together that kind of leave us in this spot where these people will vote for president because they know about what the president does and know the candidates, but they don't necessarily feel that same way about state legislative offices and other offices down the ballot.
Yeah, so basically so it's sort of a few buckets. I like these buckets. One is around agency. Our voters don't feel like their vote for state leg matters. Wild and crazy. Look at the folks on this line who won their races in entire majorities with handfuls of votes. I saw someone in the chat from Pennsylvania in 2022, 63 votes in one district, Missy Serrato's district, flipped the entire House in Pennsylvania blue. 63 votes. It's the same number of people on this call, right? And so it's interesting to know, and it's useful to know that our voters don't think their vote for state leg matters, because we can show them an example of where it has mattered, where every vote really matters. And we can talk about that. But then the other is this idea of don't know enough. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting, Isa, coming out of the work that we did, was this question about civic duty. So we asked voters in our survey, is it your civic duty to vote all the way down the ballot? Or when is it your civic duty to vote on different levels of the ballot? We saw something really interesting between conservatives and liberals. Conservatives said very regularly in this survey that it's their civic duty to vote no matter what up and down the ballot. Whereas liberal voters responded that it was their civic duty to only vote in races that they know a lot about. So there you go, right? If conservatives believe that it's their civic duty to vote up and down the ballot no matter what, and we believe it's our civic duty to only vote if we have a lot of information, you can see right there some of what's driving ballot roll off on our side, and how we can win so big at the presidential level in states and not pick up any seats, or even frankly lose seats, which we did in 2020 in a lot of state legislatures. So really, really interesting findings there. And I think important because they give us insights into how to turn this around. And so maybe Bella, if you could pop in, I'll just into the chat a link. I'll just share, we just finished some additional research that we've put into a down ballot voter toolkit, which includes messaging guidance and static creative and some video ads, all for free, available to our friends and allies, with messages that we've tested using these frames that we're talking about around agency and confidence and all the rest, that we have shown in our research to actually get our voters more excited to vote down ballot. So that was really kind of the end of this process, is to take what we've learned and put it into practice. And so the goal is really to turn around the pattern that we see of down ballot roll off this election cycle. And we're talking about 34 days. So I know there's some questions, but I want to ask Representative Churches and Delegate Askew, what do you think? So Delegate Askew, you're up next year. So as he mentioned, Virginia is on a different schedule for state legislative elections, but there's a huge opportunity to flip next year. And Jamie, we've got to hold on to this fragile majority in the House this year, right? So I'm so curious for both of your thoughts about what's at stake this year and next year as we look to Virginia, voting down ballot, and what's giving you hope as we come down this final stretch, 34 days. How are you all feeling about what's going on in your states and what the future looks like? So perhaps Representative Churches and then Delegate Askew.
And I'm not trying to be dramatic or like fear monger, but all the work that we've done, it's at stake of being undone. So that's abortion care, that's the Clean Energy and Jobs Act, that's gun safety, that's free breakfast and lunch for kids, that's repealing right to work. Like all of those things are at stake in my state. And I try to remind myself of that without getting too stressed out about it every day. And what's at stake too is more legislation. I mean, I have a package of bills that I didn't have time to introduce them, and I really want to introduce them, and it would just expand like reproductive care for women. So not only abortion care, but more care that is very unaffordable, that we could give people and families more access to building their families on their own terms and make it affordable. So those are things that, I mean, I haven't even had the time to fully spread my wings as a legislator. And my colleagues, I respect them so much, so deeply rooted in community and listening and providing the tools they need. We need to tackle housing. We need to work on prescription drug affordability. Like all of these things are at stake if we don't have the majority. And what gives me hope, to be honest, is these people, these young people that are showing up. On my team, I have 14 people. two of them live in my district or are old enough to vote for me. So it just speaks to the amount of involvement from young folks, and folks like of all different ages are also so vital. But the amount of activism and involvement and interest I am seeing in younger generations about feeling safe and welcome in our community, about world affairs, about state affairs, about community involvement is incredible. And if I was 16 and I was like that, I would be like, whoa, my future is bright. But these kids are blowing me away, and they keep me going because I want to do this work for them so that they have better opportunities. So that's my little 2 cents.
The issues are the same in Virginia as Representative Churches stated, right? The gun violence prevention, safe communities, fully funding our schools, making sure our schools aren't privatized, and our governor doesn't privatize our public school system. But I think, which is important, and it's sad if you think about it, Virginia is the last state in the South that has access to abortion care. And that's truly the number one thing that's going to be on the ballot next year in Virginia, because if we lose the House and if we lose the governors, if we don't win the governor's mansion, that's gone. We're Florida. We're, no offense to anybody that's from any of these states on the call, and I know what you're fighting for, but we're easily Georgia, we're Florida, we're Texas. We saw I know most of us saw the story where the woman died in the parking lot in Georgia, right? And that can happen, in Virginia. We've seen, and I've spoken to some providers, and our numbers have almost tripled from women coming from across, individuals really coming from across different states, seeking access to abortion care. So that's the number one issue for us, I would say. But like I said, the issues that Representative Churches, stated too. I'm a son of a public school teacher, right? I'm on education and appropriations, so I continue to fight for teacher pay raises, making sure that we figure out a good funding structure for our schools. So a school on one side of town isn't funded differently, and these children have equal access to the kids whose parents have a higher tax base, so the school gets more money. You can look at a city in my district and you can see that play out every day. But it's going to be a tough race next year. I think a lot of times, if you look at historically the presidential election, whoever wins the presidency sort of and oftentimes plays a role about who has more momentum coming into the November of the year that the House is up that next year. But I think that's kind of, um, I would say, sort of a antiquated sort of way of looking at it, because I know that we're going to have amazing candidates. You know, we already have the majority, and everybody in our caucus is going to work hard and fight for the issues that our constituents, you know, care about. And I think that's going to take us over the finish line next year. And to say the point, about the energy, right? I think we had that this year. I was fortunate to go to the DNC, and you know, that was something in a memory I won't soon forget. The energy that was in that arena. You know, we've had multiple events, you know, back home and in district and across the region where we've had, you know, hundreds of people show up. You know, typically you always kind of make this joke. It's kind of the same 30 sort of activists, and we appreciate them. You know, they come to everything. You have a phone bank, you know, the same 30, 40 people there. You come to, you have this, the same folks are there, but you can see that they're new people and new people getting involved and wanting to be a part of making history by electing, you know, Vice President Harris as our first woman and woman of color as president of the United States.
I was also at the DNC, and it was electric. It was so cool. It was incredible. And I think that enthusiasm, having it at the top of the ticket, is huge for us down ballot, right? Because of everything we've been talking about tonight. We need a lot of folks to turn out at the top in order to get enough votes for state ledge to win because of ballot roll off. So we're in such a better position with Harris at the top of the ticket than we were with Biden at the top of the ticket when it comes to state legislative races, because there's such enthusiasm and there's such opportunity to bring the folks in who, Jamie, you're here, you're inspired by, right? These are the folks who are most likely to roll off their ballots, young voters, voters of color, women. And so getting them involved is so, so critically important. And you know, I just wanted to raise up a comment that Julie made in response to Beth's comment that in Northwest Pennsylvania, it seems like blue candidates never get anywhere, and it's really hard in that region. And Julie lifted up that in Ohio, in her county, it's the same, but they're chipping away slowly at the margins, and it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I really appreciate that, because I know on this call, we've talked to a couple of state lawmakers who have been those majority makers, right? And who have had their entire chambers flip. And not everybody is in a state where that's possible. And I would lift up Virginia in 2017 again. Democrats were down 15 seats in that lower chamber. It was not, no one thought it was winnable, right? And it took a couple cycles to flip, which is why we have to put our stake in the ground in places like Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, right? Places where we know that there are incredible progressives running. They want to serve, and we have to chip away, right? And I always say, you know, I think Democrats are too preoccupied with wins and losses, right? Donors, that's what donors care about. That's what the media cares about. Did you win? Did you lose? I actually think it's just as important to center how close we came and how much the gap was closed in any given race. We have to center that alongside wins and losses, because that's the real measure of progress, right? How much closer are we getting? Did a candidate this time only lose by 3 points when in that district no Democrat had ever run before? That's just as important as winning when you take a longer view of it, which is what we have to do in places like Ohio and elsewhere. And we're doing it, right? Everyone on this call is committed to doing that. And so I'm just so grateful for all the work, Jamie and Alex, that you are doing in the legislature, that you will continue to do. You know, the beautiful blue trifectas that you've had and will have again, show us what's possible. And again, comes down to tiny, tiny, tiny margins. Again, in the last gubernatorial in Virginia a couple of years ago, 65,000 more Democrats voted at the top of the ballot for governor than voted for state ledge. 65,000 more people. We lost the entire chamber by 750 votes. So this is what's at stake. We've got 34 days. We know the assignment. It's about getting our voters out getting them to vote not just at the top of the ballot, but to tick that box all the way down. And so all the work, Jamie, you're doing on the doors. Alex, I know you're out on the doors for candidates who are running this year in Virginia for Congress and all the rest. And so this is why we do this work. So I'll just share a few calls to action and then turn things over to Julie and Julie to share calls to action from Red, White, and Blue and to wrap us up. So we're going to post this in the chat as well. But we are running national phone banks all the time for our over 50 endorsed candidates. These are the majority makers in our chambers this year. Please come and join us. We made over 120,000 calls last week, which is a lot of calls. Our volunteers are so fired up. We're doing a phone bank with our friends at Gaslit Nation every Wednesday between now and the election. It's super fun. We're running phone banks with our friends at Run for Something. We've got a phone bank with Aaron Ryan and Alyssa Mastromonaco from Crooked with our friends at Vote Save America next week. So please join us and have some fun. And again, attention is not a pie. This is not zero sum. You can do everything that you can to elect Kamala Harris and also help state legislative candidates win. So let's leave it all on the field. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I'll turn things over to Julie and Julie.
Thank you so much for everyone, for the speakers for being here. Like I said, we have been relying on sister district data for our trainings. And that is what I want to put out there, is that we are doing what is called Rally Your Squad. And you've heard about the tight margins and how close these races are. So you talk to a friend or two, you can actually flip a seat. You can flip a chamber in some of these examples we've given. So just talking to like a couple of friends, and you talk to them, I talk to people, Julie talks to people, like we actually can have a huge impact on these down ballot races. And we know our friends and family don't always know who the candidates are. We know they roll off. We need to have those conversations. So the Rally Your Squad program is all about helping you do that really effectively. I am going to drop a link in the chat to that if you're interested in checking it out on our website. If you would love to be involved, you can also text Rally to 59868. Get on the platform, sign up, set up your account. You ask what friends you're going to reach out to. We get you great information like, does your friend normally vote? Have they asked for an absentee ballot? Have they already voted? So you know who to concentrate on. Okay, that is my spiel for the evening. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to Sister District for joining us.